Hi, I'm Pete Best. I run a post-production sound studio called Best Effects, about 150 metres actually from the Film Corporation. And I'm in my 40th year, believe it or not. 30 years with Best Effects and 10 years before that at another studio. Well, I used to be a plumber, believe it or not. And when I was doing my apprenticeship, I mixed for live bands, and that was where I got the bug for sound engineering. But having punks and things in the 70s, all these mostly punks, kind of wanting to kill the mixer, I figured I might get out of that and do some studio work. So I went into studios and basically worked for nothing for many months. I actually went to the SAFC when they were down at Hendon too and worked there. And after about 6 months, I was offered a job at both places, but I took this job at a place called Adelaide Studios, and that was a studio that basically did radio humour. And when I say radio, it was like almost like little radio plays, if you like. So we used lots of sound effects, lots of talent, lots of actors. And we did huge campaigns. Like for NRMA, we'd spend a week recording and 2 weeks editing to make these massive commercials. And that was a lot of fun and taught me a lot about casting, directing talent, and also how to use sound and sound effects and atmospheres to create emotion and scenes. So after radio, I opened up my own studio in 1992 and brought the very first digital workstation to Adelaide. It was hard work because it was right on the technology just working. So it's a bit of a scary thing. I'd gone out on my own. I bought a piece of technology that no one else had really used very much of. So that's what I did. And 10 years after being in business, I then opened a video suite for a little while. Didn't really like that much, so but we did do quite a few big projects. Like we toured with Ben Folds 5 and shot a video with them and did all the sound for that. So that was fun. So I'm just going to talk about the basics of sound, really, the things that you can do cheaply, and why I care about sound. Well, some of the best directors in the world will tell you otherwise. I mean, sound is 50% of any film. Most successful filmmakers will tell you that, and it's something that I think needs to be embedded into kids right from the start, because everyone seems to get too immersed in vision only, and sound is emotion and feeling, and you can scare people, you can do all sorts of things with sound. So a basic shoot, equipment. You're going to need a few things. These things, first thing I think you need to do as a sound person is you need to understand the script. You've got to write down some notes after you've read the script, ask lots of questions, get some questions prepared, I should say. And next thing you need to do, as far as I'm concerned, is that you need to talk to the director a lot. Find out what they're thinking big time, because quite often you'll read a script and you'll go, I'm not sure, don't be embarrassed. You should definitely ask them. If they can't, if they're not explaining it well enough on the script, then maybe they need to rework the script a bit. I think you've got to kind of trust your instincts in not insulting them, because you're dealing with egos, so you've got to work that out on the way, I guess. So make a big list of equipment from that discussion from the director. This is sort of basics for a basic sound production. Equipment. Okay, so these sort of things are available pretty cheaply these days. The little two-track digital recorders are quite cheap now. You've probably got them already in schools, maybe. But stay away from iPhones because you just can't do anything with it really. Unless they're like right here, it's just not going to work for sound. So dialogue recording, what you need, the 2-track digital recorder, as I said. Hopefully that's got 2 microphone inputs because you might use a shotgun microphone for dialogue and you might also have a lapel for dialogue. You'll need a boom pole and a radio mic if possible, and usually you hide those. If it's a documentary, you might not, or if it's just a general shoot like news, they'll just have it there. But in film, you'll probably want to hide it. Sound effects recording, well, you just need the recorder, the boom, and a boom pole, really, because most of the sound effects will be mono. If you're doing an atmosphere recording, you'll need 2 microphones or a stereo microphone. But generally for young filmmakers, I probably wouldn't recommend recording atmospheres because most of that you can do in post. You might be shooting in the Adelaide Hills and there's magpies everywhere, but the film might be shot, it might be set in another country. Well, we don't want magpies. So atmospheres is something that you make that decision on the go. Post-production, a little bit's been talked about this. Basically, all the sound gets ingested with the pictures. A lot of it is, I think Dave was talking about the multi-track files. I think they're called polyfiles. So it's basically one stereo file that's been encoded with all the other tracks. So someone like David will bring that into his edit suite, do the edit, and then he'll export it back out, send it to me as an OMF or a AAF after it's got to a final cut. And then I can right-click and I'll see all the microphones, hopefully beautifully labelled. Not always, but it allows us to choose between a lapel mic and a shotgun mic, or perhaps even a hidden mic sometimes. So then we can create a room. So you may want the boom because it's getting some of the room atmosphere. The lapel might be just a bit too close for what your scene is, so you might not want to use that. So we can swap around with those. But in a basic edit, there's probably only going to be 1 or 2, maybe 4 microphones maximum. Okay. So in the edit, they usually put in some atmospheres, possibly from the shoot, sometimes even their own, just as a demonstration for the director while they're editing, and usually a temporary music track. Could be from a musician, but 9 times out of 10 it's some guide tracks for the musician. And then it's exported, as we said, to the audio workstation. And these formats, by the way, are a standard. AAF is the AVID standard. OMF is kind of everybody's editing system can do. Some of the new editing systems, I think, can do AAFs as well. So it comes to us, and we pull it all in the AAF. We open it all up, and we'll have all the tracks that the video editor has now put into their session. It's now with me. I've got them all on those tracks, and I'll start then giving it to sound editor roles. So what are sound editor roles? This now is probably more of a larger film, not so much a student film. So in film, there's many roles. The dialogue editor does this, cleans, edits, technical clarity issues. I wonder whether this will play. Here's an example of a dirty dialogue.
So what we're here to do is to collect a whole bunch of data since there aren't any board around at the moment because of COVID-19.
And this is what we ended up doing.
So what we're here to do is to collect a whole bunch of data since there aren't any board around at the moment because of COVID-19.
The reason why we do that is we don't really want all that noise in a lot of cases. because we want to add our own noise. So then we can control the level of noise behind the dialogue. Sometimes you may not be able to clean it up, and if you can't, that's called a noise level. So there'll be noise that you have to bring your atmospheres up to get it to sound nice and flat. So that's the basics. An effects editor puts these things in. An effects editor would, add things like cars, car doors, keys, house doors, and basically anything that moves that isn't connected possibly to the body, because that is done by a Foley artist. But first of all, an atmosphere editor will add the atmospheres. As I say, depending on the thing, I should put the scene in there, but basically that was a bar and then it changed to an outdoor scene. What have we got here now? Okay, so as I mentioned, the Foley artist does mainly things that are connected to the body, being feet, hands, anything they touch kind of thing. So this is sort of what would be the feet. This is what's called spot effects. It's only a little short snippet there, but basically the Foley artist will literally be the walker in a room on a floor and do every single one of those actors' feet. And yes, he does wear, if it's a he, wears high heels. And he's got a friend of mine up in Corn, John Simpson, I use him for my Foley, and he's probably got more shoes than anyone I know. All sorts of shoes. But he's amazing. He will send me everything down here. All the feet just laid in characters, and then spots are all just underneath that. And he'll do what's called a rustle track. So it's just any movement of the actor comes through as a rustle track. What else? Right, so a music editor. Basically, I don't know why I put this on here. Usually cuts are, in my case, if I'm employing a music editor, they'd be cutting the production music, which is licensed music that they've been brought into the film. Like the Girl Asleep one you saw, some of that was licensed, well, a lot of it was licensed music. And then if it's a musician that's supplying a multi-track of music, being original music, they usually supply it as a mixed surround sound, split up into, usually put up in different sections of the band. So it might have a percussion section in 5-track, and then it might have synthesizers in another 5-track, etc. Right, so we've still got a few more. Then there's a sound supervisor. That's me. Sound supervisor is there to bring the whole team together, to work closely with the director, understand what's required for the film, try and get inside their head, and then choose the right sound editors for the job. And then we just work closely with them throughout the whole process. And things change a lot. So it's a good thing sometimes if a film can afford it, to have a sound supervisor to keep all those things in line. So just to sum up the roles, there they are, the sound recorders. Yeah, so there's the sound recordist, the boom operator, which helps the sound recordist, obviously. Then there's the editors, dialogue editors, effects editors, atmospheres, music editors, Foley mixers, and music engineer, and like I said, there's one more that I've just added in there. Re-recording mixer. Well, that is a specialist role. It takes you probably, I reckon it will take nearly 20 years for someone to get to a high level of mixing feature film. It's a specialist role, and they're in charge of actually doing the final mix of the entire film. It's usually broken up into sections, so I did have some slides about it, but I think it gets a bit technical. But basically, dialogue will all be sent to one track. There might be 20 dialogue tracks and they all go to what's called one bus. And then the effects will go to another bus, and then the atmos will go to another bus. So all those tracks that are in each one of those sections, we pre-mix first. So we get our levels of all the dialogue, we change the EQ for perspective, we fade things for people walking out the room, and we might pan things and things like that. So all those things are done in what's called the pre-mix. And then you go through and do atmospheres with the dialogue, sound effects, etc. And you just keep going through every one of those sections until we get to a final mix. And then, because they're all going to their own tracks, you might only end up with 15 or 20 tracks, or faders, if you like, to mix for the final mix, as opposed to 500, which is some of the jobs where I've had have got that far, where there's 500 tracks. So you obviously need a really good mixing console, and you understand how it runs and how to find every sound effect or atmosphere in a second. So, pathways. It's a hard one. I put these here because these are the only ones I can think of as far as studying sound. There's the university AFTRS, but it's in Sydney. And I think their AFTRS course may have got smaller. I'm not sure about that. MAPS is still going, and that's a really nice place to meet other like-minded filmmakers and learn about gear and the things that are available to you. But the thing that I probably suggest the most is somehow if you can get into a film set and work with if you want to be a sound recordist, and work with a sound recordist, even if you're a lackey, getting coffees, whatever, you just watch, learn. That's all you can do. Get some relatively cheap equipment or hire some cheap equipment, understand how it works, and just, unfortunately, you've got to learn a lot yourself. As far as being an editor, I think you have to work out what path you like. Do you want to edit dialogue? Do you want to edit sound effects, atmospheres? They're all fun, and as someone that's starting, you should probably do all of them, definitely, because then you've got an understanding of what's required. But pathways, I can't really think of any others, but I think learning on the job is probably the best way in this industry to actually get in. And of course, making films with other young filmmakers and making lots of mistakes is also a good thing. So, is there any questions or anything that you want to ask me about that process? Or yep. What? Sorry. What? Well, it depends on what you're recording. If you're recording dialogue, you probably just say about -12, maybe go up to 8, I would say. If it's atmospheres, it'll probably be quite a bit lower, I would say, because otherwise the more you bring up the level of the microphone, the more noise you're going to bring up. Digital is pretty forgiving, really, and there's lots of tools these days. Not that I kind of want to hear it, but we can clean up, as you heard, we can clean dialogue quite well these days. Yep. Oh, okay. Well, there's two ways of recording Foley. One can be just one microphone and someone's just doing the action, and then it would be in the mix. The Foley mixer might do the fade for you. Depends on how much time they've got. I worked on The Hobbit in New Zealand a few years ago, and I was the Foley mixer. And what we did is we had two microphones. We had one at the end of a walkway and one at the beginning. So I just cross-faded as he walked. So we got the perspective as we were recording it. And you can use EQ to change perspective. So if you take bass out and then you bring it back in when they get closer. So there's several ways you can do it. Yeah. It's fun. It's good fun doing Foley. Yep. Oh, yes, sorry. Yes, I should have mentioned that. Well, the standard really for the industry is Pro Tools. And just like DaVinci, you can get a Pro Tools free. I think it's called Pro Tools First, and that is free. And that'll give you a basic understanding of how it works. I don't think it does surround sound, but it probably doesn't matter. It's a good little program to get used to, but there's plenty of other free programs some people go for, but they're very clunky. Pro Tools is probably the one that everyone uses. I mean, Foley artists are amazing. Like, this guy, he'll watch the footage once, and it could be like 3 minutes long, and he'll just go for it. And he almost always gets it in sync. It's just amazing. He's been doing it for 35, 40 years, so I think he knows what he's doing. Yeah. No more questions? Oh, I hope that was helpful.